guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad you stopped by today because today we're going to be making a creature that I honestly in a million years would never have thought that I was going to make. I never planned on making something like this. This was a commission that came to me and I thought it would be a fun challenge, and I'm really glad that I got to do it because I learned a lot in making really tall creatures and two-legged creatures. So today we're going to be making a walking tree. It's basically a humanoid tree creature. But I had a lot of fun with it and I can't wait to show you guys. Anyways, let's get started. Okay guys, so the first thing that I'm going to work on are going to be the clay pieces. I'm going to start with the face first, and we're going to have to do this a little differently because of the shape of the body. We're going to have to connect it differently. So I'm going to kind of work off of the countertops. I laid some tin foil down and I made a lump of tin foil to kind of help build up the shape of it. And I'm just going to start covering this in clay and making a nice little like lump to work on. I'm going to blend everything together and then I'm going to figure out where I want the face to be. And then also I want to have a tiny little hole in the tree where we're going to put some spirit creatures. Now I didn't want this to be directly above the head, so I'm going to have it slightly off to the left of the face. And then when it comes to sculpting the actual face, I'm going to start off with the nose first. I want it to be a little bit larger than normal, and then I'm going to start building up the features around this. I wanted to go for something kind of soft, but also a little bit comical, so I didn't want to go super realistic or creepy. I wanted it to be kind of fantasy friendly, if that means anything. So again, I'm going to start with the nose first and then move on to the eyes. The eyes I want to be very friendly, but I also want to show that this is a very old creature, so I'm going to add some wrinkles going around it, some crow's feet, and just a few little lines here and there to make it look aged. And then this creature is going to have facial hair. He's going to have some eyebrows that droop down to the side, and he's also going to have a very large beard. So I'm not going to do a whole lot of detail around his mouth because I'm going to end up covering that up later. So I'm just going to try and figure out where the lips are going to go, and I'm going to place those. And then once I have all the facial features laid out, I like the shape and placement of them, I'm going to move on to adding that like rough bark texture to the face. And of course the rest of the clay piece. So I'm just going to add some kind of deeper lines going more up and down, and then I'm going to add a few lighter ones, add some texture on top of that, brush over it, and just kind of rough everything up to make it look like it's not smooth. It's going to be very rough and bark-like. Pretty much you shouldn't go wrong with this as long as all your textures and lines are going up and down and you don't have anything crisscrossing. I mean, if you want to add like a gash, like if someone was cutting down the tree, that could be done. But if you're just adding the texture, just make sure everything is going up and down with the bark texture. So I got the texture all laid out and I'm pretty much ready to bake our clay face. So I'm going to put this in the oven for about 45, maybe 55 minutes because some of it is a little thicker than normal, and it's going to be at a 275 Fahrenheit temperature. And then while that's baking, we're going to start working on the clay feet and hands. Now with the feet, I wasn't quite sure if we were going to do 2. They really wanted to. At first I was like, can we do maybe 4 just for stability? But they really wanted 2 legs for this tree creature. So for that, because it's going to be only standing on 2, I need to make the bottoms of the feet very wide to help distribute the weight. Of course, his legs are also wood, so I thought it would be really fun to have the bottoms of his feet have those rings from when you cut a tree. So I'm just making a very flat surface at first, cutting some circles, and then drawing in the rings of the tree. Now I'm going to pre-bake these for about 20 or 25 minutes, and then we can start putting the rest of the foot together. I just need this kind of more solid to work with for us to do the top of the foot. And then once those are out of the oven and have cooled to touch, I'm going to hot glue some lumps of foil on the very top, and we're going to build the rest of the foot up around this. I'm also going to put some holes in the tin foil so we can add some wires, and these are going to help us add the feet to the wireframe later. So I'm going to glue those in place and start building up my clay. It's going to be pretty thick. I want my feet to be kind of heavy to also help the creature stand up. Once I have the clay built up around the sides of the feet, I can then start adding a texture to it. So I'm going to kind of blend the edge a little bit so that it doesn't go from like one piece of clay to another. I want it to look like it's a solid piece, and then I'm going to add some lines to go along with the texture of the bark. Now, because these are really thick and wide, I figured adding some really deep wrinkles and cuts into the wood would really make it look nice. So I'm going to start with that, and then I'm going to move on to making some smaller lines and then kind of adding a bit of a brush texture to the rest of the clay surface. And of course we're going to have to bake our clay feet as well, so I'm going to put these in the oven for about 45 to 55 minutes at 275 Fahrenheit. And then for the clay hands, these are going to need a wire frame. So I made a very simple one where we have 4 fingers and a thumb, and I made the fingers very long with the wires because I'm not going to cover the entirety of it. I'm just going to cover the majority of the hand, and then we're going to use the rest of the wires to build up the length of the fingers. Mainly doing this because the clay that I'm using is original Sculpting, and it's not very flexible, so I don't want to make anything really thin and worry about a finger snapping off. So I'm going to start by building up the clay at the base of the hand where the palm would be, and then I'm going to slowly work my way up the wires. So I'm going to do this to all of the digits, the thumb and the 4 fingers, and I'm not going to go too far. I'm just going to go a little bit past where the main knuckles would be. And then I'm going to add a little bit of texture and kind of separate these so you can distinguish the fingers from each other. Again, not adding a ton of detail to this because we're going to add more to it later that is not going to be clay. So I'm going to put these in the oven as well, and they'll probably bake just as long as everything else, about 45 minutes to 55 minutes at 275 Fahrenheit. Now normally when making my art dolls, this is when we would start painting everything right as everything cooled down from the oven, but with this piece I think it's going to be a lot easier and look a lot better if we paint our clay pieces after we assemble the art doll. So let's get started on the sewing and putting that together real quick. Now with the pattern that I'm using, it looks very human-like. So we have a main torso, an arm pattern, and a leg pattern. I'm not going to make 2 of each because we're just going to use the same shape. So I'm only going to have one pattern for both arms and both legs. And then I made a few patterns for some branches, and these are going to go at the very top. So I'm going to use this and get all my fabric pieces cut out. I'm kind of using a bit of a silvery textured fabric that I thought would work really well for this. And again, I'm just going to get everything cut out and we're going to start doing some sewing. I'm going to get the main sewing done first where we're using the sewing machine, and then we'll get to where we start putting everything together on a wire frame. I tried to leave the sewing for the body very simple to where everything just has a left and a right or a top and a bottom. We sandwich everything together and just kind of sew around it. So I left the sewing pretty simple. So I'm going to get that done with the sewing machine, and then I made a pretty simple wireframe. The main difference with most of my wireframes is I had to really enforce the legs of this wireframe. That way it could actually stand up. So everything's a little bit thicker. And of course it's more shaped like a stick figure than my animal figures that I normally make. So we're going to start adding things to the wireframe in sections. I'm going to start with the torso, and when I did the sewing I left holes for where all the wires are going to stick out. So I've got 3 wires that are sticking out of the top of the head for the branches, the arm wires, and the leg wires. And I'm just going to run my wireframe into this and through all of those different holes. Then I'm just going to stuff and close up the back of our torso. Then we're going to start adding the fabric for the arms and legs. So for this, I'm just going to slide them over the wire frame, and then we're going to sew them in place and stuff them. Adding the clay hands and feet is really simple. We're just going to take the wires that are sticking out of the back of what we sculpted, and we're going to wrap them onto the wires of the wireframe. So just make sure to adjust the wireframe so it's the correct length. We're going to wrap everything together, and then we're going to take the fabric that goes around the bases of the feet and hands and just glue them around that. You want to let that dry for a little bit, and if you have any little holes or whatnot to help stuff some remaining stuffing into that, just close that up. And then for adding the branches, I'm going to stuff them first and then run them over the wireframe and sew them into place. Now at first I was only going to do 3 main branches, but after looking at it I decided to add an extra one. The only thing with this is the wire for this branch isn't connected to the rest of the wireframe, but it still supports itself just fine. And then for adding the face to our tree, I tried something a little bit different because I didn't want to just glue the face onto what we had. I wanted to kind of make it a little bit easier on myself. So I figured since the tree is kind of round, it would be easier to glue the face onto a separate piece of fabric and then cut that fabric out and sew it onto the front of our creature. Now, at first I was using just normal fabric glue, but I found this wasn't really holding itself very well, so I later ended up redoing this using resin. I went completely all out because I figured resin would for sure hold it in place and it worked just fine. And then once I had all of our clay pieces in the body assembled, I started working on the painting. So I'm going to start with my 3D paints first because I want to add a little bit more texture to the body. And I'm just going to add some lines here and there to make it look a little bit more wrinkly and rough and stuff like that. And then also it helps to kind of cover up some of the seams like around where the face is connected to the body. I also went over the wires sticking out of the fingertips with my 3D fabric paint just to make sure everything was completely covered and we wouldn't see any of the wires later on. I'm going to end up covering this up in felt later and thickening it, but for now I'm just adding a little bit of 3D paint to cover the wire up. And then once that's dried, I'm going to move on to painting the entire body. So I'm going to start with the clay pieces and get everything kind of a gray color to match. I really couldn't match the silver of the fabric, but I wanted to get it at least gray. And then once that dried, I started adding browns, a little bit of green here and there, some yellows. Pretty much I want to keep the fabric looking silver, but I also need to add some of those colors to make it look like wood. Otherwise, he's going to look more like stone. And then to finish up the painting, I'm going to start working a little bit more on the face. I'm going to add some black into the hole that we're going to add our little spirit creatures to darken it up and make it look like it's deeper than it actually is. I'm also going to add the black into some of our little cracks to make those look deeper. And then I'm going to paint the eyes and possibly add some little highlights here and there around the face. Nothing too much. Once the painting is done, we can start decorating our tree creature. So the first thing that I want to decorate with is some mushrooms. I'm going to add some patches kind of around his face, a little on his leg, and then a little bit on his foot as well, just kind of making it look random but also more evenly distributed. I didn't want to have too many mushrooms on one side versus the other. So for this, I made these out of Instamorph. Pretty simple. I already had some Instamorph that was stained a darker color from another project that I didn't use, and I just shaped them into kind of little half circles and made them curve a little bit, and then I'm going to glue these in place on the body. So I used my hot glue gun and I glued everything in place, and then I took a little bit more of my 3D fabric paint and I decided to go around the edges of the mushroom just to add a little bit more texture to the surrounding area and to cover up the hot glue. I would have used the 3D fabric paint as a way to glue the mushrooms into place, but it just wasn't sturdy enough to hold them in place while it dried, so I had to use the hot glue. Then I moved on to working on the fingers. So what I did was I took some strips of felt that were a gray color and I glued them over those wires that were sticking out. Now these are going to be a little bit longer than they will be at the end. I'm going to cut them shorter, but for now I just left them kind of long. So I glued my felt into place, and then I took more of my 3D fabric paints because I realized the fingers just needed to be a little bit thicker. They looked too creepy. So I added a bunch of white because I was out of my grays and my browns, and I just went over the knuckles and covered up where I added the felt. I let everything dry and then I repainted the fingers of the hands. And then we still need our little spirit dudes to go into our little hole. So I actually forgot to work on these when I was making all the other clay pieces, so I just really quickly made them out of a bunch of different balls of clay. I added them to a wire so that I had something to hold on to. They were just really tiny. And then I just baked them for about 20 minutes, painted them with a glow-in-the-dark paint, and then added some black paint to the eye holes and the mouth hole. Once those were completely dried, I then glued them into place. I realized one of them is a little too tall, so instead of being in the hole, he's going to sit on one of the mushrooms. And then lastly, we need to add some green stuff to our tree because he's not going to be a dead walking tree, he's going to be very vibrant. He's old, but he's not dead. So we're going to do some leaves and we're going to do some vines. For the leaves, I cut a bunch of different felt that was different colors of green into leaf shapes, and I glued them together into some bunches that will end up gluing on the branches. And then for the vines, I found this really pretty lace fabric, and I'm just going to cut some long strips of it, and I'm going to sew it into place around the branches. And then I'm going to also sew into the fabric and make it kind of bunch up a little bit. So basically I'm just kind of like stitching along it and bunching it up to make a thicker vine. I'm going to make thinner vines and thicker ones, and I'm just trying to get a bunch of different lengths and stuff, and I just want to make it look very full and lifelike. So I did quite a bit on all the different branches, and I did go back later and add more leaves to the branches after I added the vines. Oh, for this I'm gonna have to step way back. Okay, so this is our tree creature. I am so happy with it. I think a lot of the personality really started showing once I got his beard and eyebrows going. And again, I'm really happy with it, and I can't wait to send it off to its new owner. So again, this was a commission, that's why it's not going to be in my Etsy shop, but I do have a bunch of other creatures in my Etsy shop if anyone wants to buy them and give them a new home. I also have links down below to a lot of the different art supplies that I like to use to make my art dolls, so if you're interested in that, you want to buy anything, check that down below as well. These are affiliated links, so I do make a little bit from you buying through them. It won't cost you anything extra or anything like that, it just helps support the channel. So again, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!